First thing I want to say is, wow, this is incredible. Unbelievable. My name is Jerry Kilbride. On behalf of the, I'm very nervous, Kankakee Valley Autism Society, Julie Gindy, President, the Kilbride family, and the Kilbride Family Classic, I want to extend a welcome to all of you for this special evening tonight. We are so pleased that so many of you would come tonight to hear the incredible story of this lady and her life experiences dealing with autism. We also want to thank all of the sponsors who helped put this evening together. It has been, as you can tell, quite a success, and we are so pleased and happy about that. There is a number of representatives from the Illinois Farm Bureau from Bloomington who are here tonight, and we want to thank them for coming, and we are pleased that they are here. We have a very special family who journeyed down from the Chicago area to be with us tonight. Maurice Schnell and his mother and dad, Jennifer and Willie Schnell. And Maurice has been very much involved with Easter seals for many years, and a couple of years ago, he was the national spokesperson for Easter seals. Would this family please stand up so everybody can see who they are? In the past 5 or more years, the Snell family has come down to our event. And prior to the event starting, right before the event starts, Maurice gets up and gives a special message to everybody who is present about dealing with autism. And it really sets the tone for the event, and it also is an indication to everyone why we do what we do with this event. His message is very inspirational, and we are so grateful that he and his family continue to come down here. In the last 8 or 9 years, our Walk Run for Autism has raised about $110,000 plus or minus, and we have donated that money, half of it to the National Autism Society, currently Autism Speaks, and the other half has gone to the local Autism Society. And we are so grateful for this. And I got to tell you, and I think most of you know this is one of the most giving communities that I've ever been involved with, and they just keep doing it, and we are so grateful for that. Now we would like to ask Julie Gindy, and she's already on the stage, I believe, and some of the Kilbride family to come up, because we want to give her our contribution to the Kankakee Valley Autism Society from our event this year. For any of you who can't read it, it is a check for $11,000. And I'm sure you're all glad that I'm finished. And now I would like to introduce Carol Bowman, the president of the Kankakee Friends of the Library.
Good evening and welcome. Before we get started, I want to recognize some very special hardworking people that have made this whole evening possible. Some of them you've already met. I would like to thank Kankakee District 111, Mrs. Colleen Legg, Superintendent, and Deb Dilks, Principal here at Lincoln Cultural Center, for allowing us to move to this larger facility. We never would have been able to house this many people on the 4th floor of the library, so thank you so much for that. And special thanks to the Kankakee chapter of the Autism Society. You've met Jerry and Judy Kilbride, Jeff and Julie Gindy, and all of their members for all of the work that they did preparing for this, promoting it on Facebook and on the airwaves, and attending to so many details. I'd like to thank the staff of the Kankakee Library, Steve Bertrand, Director, Allison Beasley, Vicki Forker, Nick Garcia, and Michael Costanza. They've been working very hard for weeks to get ready for this. And then you've seen some of the other sponsors up here on the screen, but I want to mention them again as well. The Kankakee Farmers Market, the Kilbride Family Classic, Options of Kankakee County, the Illinois Farm Bureau, Kankakee County Farm Bureau, and State Representative Lisa Dugan. Thank you for your sponsorship. Just want to mention, make sure that your cell phones are turned off or on vibrate as a courtesy. And if there is anyone in the audience that we're videotaping, and we're going to have deaf sign interpretation as part of that, but if there is anyone in the audience that we're not aware of that needs interpretation, just raise your hand and let us know. But now I'd like to introduce Judy Kilbride from the Kankakee chapter of the Autism Society, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. And thank all of you for attending this incredibly wonderful evening. It's like a dream come true to have our guest speaker, Dr. Temple Grandin, with us tonight. If you'll give me just a minute, I'd like to share a couple of brief thoughts with you. My experience with autism has been both professional and personal. As a former teacher and director of special education for the Bourbonnais School District, I've had firsthand experience working with children with autism and with their incredible teachers. The heartfelt dedication that these women and men give to their young people and to finding a cure is nothing short of amazing. On a personal note, my husband Jerry and I are the grandparents of a young man who was diagnosed with autism at age 3. We have lived firsthand not only Scotty's trials and triumphs, but those of his parents and siblings as well. Today I have come to realize that there is only one word that sums up autism and all of the people in its world: believe. You see, over the years, time and time again, I have seen the strength, courage, and determination of countless parents, teachers, and families who believe in their children who are diagnosed with autism. They advocate tirelessly for them because they believe in the spirit and energy of their young people. They believe in their ability to learn, to grow, and to be productive members of our society. They believe that they can help their children achieve the very best and highest of their capabilities, even to exceed them. They believe there are no limits and that there should be no boundaries. They believe that no one or nothing will stand in the way of or hinder their children from the education and social opportunities that every person deserves and needs. But most importantly, as parents, teachers, grandparents, family members, and volunteers, they believe that, like Temple Grandin's own mother and her many understanding and wonderful teachers along the way, children who have autism or any disability can be different, but they are not less. Thank you. As parents and educators, we believe in Dr. Grandin, this incredible woman, is one of the inspiring and extraordinary reasons why. Because the people around her believed in her, Dr. Grandin overcame enormous obstacles and gave us so many answers to our questions. She explained autism so that we could understand what it feels like when someone touches or talks to you, so that we could understand how the mind processes thought and sees pictures instead of words, so that we could understand why routine is so important. For the first time, she brought us into the world of a person who has autism instead of the other way around. We can never thank her enough for her insight, her integrity, and her spirit. And of course, for being such a tireless advocate for our children, teens, and adults who have autism. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor beyond words to present Dr. Temple Grandin.
Wait a minute, I gotta get my slides going here. When I was 3.5 years old, I had all the full-blown symptoms of autism, no speech, and I was really lucky to have really good, wait a minute, what's going on? Okay. Really good early intervention. By the time I was 2.5 years old, I was in speech therapy, and they call it ABA today, but the good teachers, they just know how to teach. And I hope we're gonna be able to get that going, because it's really gonna mess me up if I don't have my slides. Okay, looks like maybe I'm seeing some of them there. Okay, good. Okay, I can't emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. The worst thing you could do with an autistic 3-year-old is do nothing with them. Now, if you're in a situation where you can't get services, you get some volunteers. And if you only get like 1 hour of teaching a week, to have the volunteers see what the professional teachers do and do more of it, because it's not rocket science. I'll tell you that right now. My mother hired a nanny when I was 3, and she played endless turn-taking games with me and my sister. You gotta teach these kids how to take turns. They're really, really bad at that. And really, they need about 20 hours a week of being kept in contact with the world. You can't just let them sit in the corner and just do their little things. And the thing is, you gotta stretch these kids, because if you don't stretch them, they don't progress. See, the problem you've got with autism is it's a very big disorder. At one end, you got Steve Jobs and Einstein. Einstein didn't talk until age 3. And at the other end, you've got somebody that's going to remain nonverbal. So it's a very, very big spectrum. You see, this is one of the things that makes it difficult to deal with. It's like a little bit of autistic trait gives you computers. Too much of autistic trait, no, they're not going to be working in Silicon Valley. But the thing is, I work in a technical field, and I go back and forth between the autism world and the technical world. And I see lots of people that I know are mildly on the spectrum, that do things like design computers, programming, engineering, art, just all sorts of different things. Now, the thing is, no surprises for these kids, but you gotta push some. I'm seeing too many high-functioning kids coming up to me at the book table, and nobody's taught them how to shake hands. They'll shake with the left instead of with the right. You gotta just teach them that. And when I was 15, I was afraid to go to my aunt's ranch. My mother told me, you can go for 1 week or all summer, but she wasn't gonna let me not go. I'm seeing too many smart kids that haven't learned basic skills, like how to talk to the clerks in the store and buy something, table manners, just very, very basic things like that. Now, one of the problems you can have with autism, dyslexia, ADHD, and many, many other disorders is sensory processing problems. Now, why isn't more research being done on this? Finally, at last, there's getting to be some decent research on this. And it's showing that these things really are real. There really are problems in the brain that cause things like sound sensitivity, touch sensitivity, visual sensitivity problems. They're real things. When I was a young child and the school bell went off, it hurt my ears like a dentist drill. Terrible. And the thing is, a sound that one child can't tolerate, another child might like. Sensory issues are extremely variable. Very, very variable. And I'm going to have to ask you to not do flashes now. You can do all the pictures you want at the book signing, but the problem is I have problems with attention shifting, and it drives me absolutely crazy because I got to concentrate what I'm thinking about, what I'm talking about. You see, you already threw me off with the flashes. Now, the thing is, you go in and you do a hearing test, you often will find that the hearing is normal. Auditory threshold, that's the ability to hear a faint sound, is normal. But the problem is that doesn't tell you anything about auditory detail. That's the ability to hear hard consonant sounds. When I was a child, if somebody said cat, rat, or bat, I had to figure that out by context. So teachers need to slow down. Slow down when you're working with these little kids. Slow down. My speech teacher would slow down and say, cat, slow down. The processing speed of the brain is a whole lot more slow. Another problem is attention shifting problems. Like if a flash goes off over there, it attracts my attention, it takes me much longer to shift my attention back because the processing speed of the brain is slower. Now this shows very clearly attention shifting. The yellow line is a normal person's gaze, and the red line is the autistic person's gaze. Now you can see that the normal person looks at the eyes, but the other big problem is, look at how many times the normal person shifts back and forth. Attention shifting is a whole lot more quick. Another sensory issue that some people can have that may have dyslexia, or ADHD or some other problem is pixelation of the visual image. The visual image will break up. You know, sort of like a bad satellite TV. Now, I don't have this problem because I wouldn't be good at drawing if I had this problem. Now, kids that tend to have this problem, they hate fluorescent lights, and they have difficulty with drawing, and they may complain about the print jiggling on the page. And you can get this with other disorders. I want to tell you right now, these diagnoses are not precise. Right now, we're going into the DMS-5, where they're going to be taking away Asperger's, which is mild autism, and change it to social communication disorder. You don't have doctors sitting around in conference rooms changing the diagnosis for tuberculosis. If you've got tuberculosis, you've either got tuberculosis or you don't have tuberculosis. And nobody's going to change that diagnosis. You know, then they're going to come out with another diagnosis, intermittent explosive disorder. That's kids that have tantrums. So the pharmaceutical companies will love treating that. You know, it's not science. You've got a little bit of science mixed in with an awful lot of insurance codes and mixed in with a lot of issues like funding. Some of the people that were on that committee actually came right out and said, well, the reason why we're getting rid of Asperger's is because we got to cut down on funding for services. Oh yeah, it's politics. It's not science. And I read, get Science and Nature, some of the top science journals, and let me tell you, they have ripped into this DMS stuff. You know, in the future, that's all going to get replaced with brain scans. But the problem you have is that you take a lot of things like depression, and autism, ADHD. These things are continuous traits. There's no black and white dividing line between mild autism and geeks and nerds. I read a thing the other day where scientists sort of looked at different personality traits and different traits in people, like a music mixing board. I'm sure you've seen those. You got like 20 sliding things, you know, to set the bass and set the different parts of the music. Well, that's how personality traits are. And when you get something that's an abnormality, some of those sliders are just pushed all the way to one side. But a little bit of these traits gives advantage. Too much of the traits, lots of problems. And right now I'm in the process of updating my behavioral genetics book and been looking at dog genetic data. And boy, they have really figured out all the stuff about the shape of the dog and how that's inherited. But you know what? The personality of that dog, it's not going to be simple. That's the same thing in a person. Sometimes a kid will complain, you'll see the print jiggle on the page. And let's look at some simple things that you can do for these visual processing problems. Get away from fluorescent lights. About 5% of the population has a real problem with fluorescent lights. In my livestock handling class, my students have to do a drawing, and I'm finding that 5% of the students have a problem with fluorescent lights. And I may have to turn away from the interpreter this way because the motion, I have problems with the rapid motion. So I'm going to stand this way. I'm really sorry. But that's something I got to do for my sensory stuff. And I'm going to get over here, and I'm going to look at the slides here and look at the slides this way. It's going to be a lot easier for me. Put my back to them. I'm really sorry. And now, the thing is that a lot of people have these sensory issues. And let's look at some simple things for the visual sensitivity problem. You can use gray, tan, or pastel paper. Try printing the homework on different paper. Try pale colored glasses, like maybe pink glasses, light lavender glasses, something like that. You know, balancing. Some kids don't fidget as much as they sit on a ball. Simple things that you can do. I find one of these out of every 50 students. I can tell you, these kids cannot draw. They absolutely cannot draw at all. Okay, some other problems with sensory. And the thing is, sensory problems are a continuum. And one of the problems is screening out background noise. And I was just reading a new paper, a 2012 paper, a brain scan study, that the frontal cortex doesn't work right on screening out background noise. It takes a lot of effort to screen it out. That's why some of these kids are going to have frequent breaks. Oftentimes they're mono-channel. They're not able to see and hear at the same time. You know, the sensory things, I think, are one of the most important research priorities. I think Autism Speaks needs to be putting a lot of money into this. Because how can you be social? How can you function at a job or function at a whole lot of stuff if you can't tolerate the environment where you work or where you socialize? You know, I think it's one of the #1 priorities in research. And why is it being neglected? I think it's because human beings are social. So we do 10,000 zillion studies on mirror neurons and social circuits, but we're not doing enough research on sensory problems, which makes socializing just impossible because a noisy bar just drives you crazy. Now, if you're working with people that are nonverbal, I'd recommend getting these 2 books. How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? Tito describes a world of sensory jumbling. Carly, she describes problems with shutting out stimulation that's just too overwhelming. Scientists have learned a lot. And where you've got problems in autism and many other disorders is circuits that connect different parts of the brain together. That's where you have the abnormalities. And these things are very variable. It's sort of like the music mixing board. And, you know, you mix certain things in a certain way, yeah, you get autism. Do it a little different way, you know, you get some depression. You know, why do these so-called disorders even exist? Because the mild forms of them give some advantages. And they are extremely complex traits. They're not simple, like whether a dog has short legs or a smushed up nose or curly hair. Those are simple traits. They've got that all mapped. I just was searching the literature just last night on dog genome stuff and all kinds of stuff on the appearance of the dog, but not on the personality of the dog. The personality of the dog's not simple. You see, when you hear a word, you see a word, you speak a word, or you think about a word, different parts of the brain turn on. And you've got to have circuits to connect the different parts of the brain together. This is kind of a route map of all the freeways in the brain that connect up different departments sort of in the office building of the brain. You know, and on the east coast there, that's the frontal cortex. Yeah, there's some circuits missing. You may get extra circuits back in Silicon Valley, you know, for doing geek stuff. It's the kind of stuff I'm interested in. Well, that's my brain scan. Okay, now what you see right there is the connectome. You see, there's a space there between the connectome and my skull. That's where the gray matter is. That's the part of the brain that you think with. This is the part of the brain that connects all the different parts of the brain together. And this is where a lot of the abnormalities probably are. This has been done by Walter Snyder at the University of Pittsburgh on a scanner paid for by the Defense Department for head injuries. And we're going to have to thank the Defense Department because they're going to be putting these out into hospitals. But the problem is, don't know how to use it yet for autism. I was the first person with autism to be scanned in this scanner. Let me tell you, it was a mind blower. I'm going to show you some of the scans. Because we found things that explained some of my symptoms. That just shows my connectome. Okay, now there's a normal auditory speech output circuit. In other words, speak what you see. And that's the normal one. And there's mine. And that's kind of a mess. Normally these circuits grow forward. Well, you see, it had trouble growing forward, so it sprouted off a lot of exit ramps going into places like the motor cortex. But what this resulted in is a loss of bandwidth. Okay, you can see where the output is. I don't have as much bandwidth. And I had problems with speech output. I had a very hard time getting my speech out. I had that language problem. There's other kids that are echolalic, and they yak out all these TV commercials, but they don't know what they mean. That's probably a different circuit. See, there's two kinds of language problems here, depending upon which circuits got wired up. Okay, now this is say what I hear. Look at the little tiny shrimpy thing that I've got compared to the normal one. Now the thing is, this is like having a new telescope. And there's going to have to be a lot of looking to find out what you can see with it. Right now it's in the very early stages. They get this out into other hospitals. Graduate students are going to be messing around with this at 3 o'clock in the morning and start, figuring out how to do experiments with it. And also figuring out how to diagnose with it. Because the thing that's been interesting in being in all of these experimental brain scan studies is what showed up in me clinically, like a problem with getting speech out, has shown up on the scans. So you need to go out and do all these scans? No. Let's just be good clinicians, be good detectives on figuring out things. Okay, there's evidence that language covers up things like visual thinking, because there's a type of Alzheimer's where the language parts of the brain gets wrecked and art comes out. I can't emphasize enough, develop the kid's area of strength. Build on the area of strength. I was good in art. My ability in art was always encouraged. But all I wanted to do was to make horsehead pictures all the time. Well, you got to broaden it out. If the kid's fixated on trains, let's read about trains. Let's do mathematics with trains. Broaden it out. Use that fixation. My fixation in cattle chutes, that became my career. I'm seeing too many kids on the high end of the spectrum where their fixation is autism. Autism is an important part of who I am, but I'm a college professor first. I am my career first. And I get a little disturbed sometimes when I see autism being the fixation. Yes, I'm interested in autism. I wouldn't want to change. I love the logical way I think. I think normal human beings are so irrational. I just have a really hard time with that. Now, my mind works like Google for pictures. And this is a picture a young man drew for me showing how he had movies in his head. And this is one of my cattle handling facilities. Now, being a visual thinker was really helpful in designing cattle handling facilities because I could test run it in my head. I didn't know that other people didn't think in pictures. I thought everybody thought in pictures. And you might wonder, why is it curved? Because as they come on around the bend, cattle have a natural behavior to want to go back to where they come from. That's a natural behavior. I want to use the cattle behavior to help me. Uh-oh, no, okay. Now, okay, good, that's working. This is an aerial view of the dip vat they reconstructed for the HBO movie. They did a fantastic job on the HBO movie, and all the projects were real. I love the fact that they duplicated all my projects absolutely exactly. I actually did build that gate that opens up in the car. And incidentally, Barnes & Noble can order the movie for you. They'd be very, very happy to do that for you. And it's titled Temple Grandin. You can get it on their website, too. Okay, now the thing is, when you're a weird geek, I never got a single job with job interviews. I question all this emphasis on teaching job interviews. Let's teach making portfolios. Because one of the things I had to do when I was young is to sell my work rather than myself. I was real resourceful about this. I remember walking up to Gregory Petrusek. He was editor of the National Provisioner, a premier national meat magazine. And I said, I'd like to do an article about cattle handling at the Swift plant. And you know what? He published my article. You see, and then I had a piece of work to show. This is one of my drawings. And people thought I was weird, but when I whipped out one of these drawings, then I got respect. I got jobs by showing off samples of my work. There's another one of my drawings. So if a child's got an artistic ability, put it on your phone. I've had people on the spectrum trying to do some freelance graphic design, and they come up to me and they give me a card. I said, let me see your work. And he's got an iPhone. I said, wait a minute, your portfolio needs to be on that phone, because you never know who can be the person that will open the door. You might meet them at the bus stop. You just never know. And that's something I figured out real early on. Now, how do you form a concept when I have all these specific pictures floating around in my head? Well, I form a concept by putting specific examples into file folders in my brain. And when I really realized that my thinking was different was when I asked people about church steeples. I was shocked to find out that most people get this vague, generalized thing. I just see specific ones. They come up like Google for images. You know, there's a childhood one. You know, there's some Fort Collins where I live. Famous ones. More famous ones. You see, they're specific. See, my concept of what a steeple is made out of specific examples put in the steeple file folder. Okay, my concept of what a silo would be different silos I've seen. Okay, I used to joke around that I had a huge internet trunk line going deep into my visual cortex. Turns out I do have one. I've been in a bunch of studies. They found my graphics card. They found my search engine. I got extra fibers back here because my mind works just like a search engine. It's associative. It's not linear. So when I write, I have problems with the organization. I have to use a really strict outline. Then you take a slice up here, and I got a really big circuit up there. Now you see where that big bush is, that's where the gray matter joins the white matter. So when you do therapy, it's probably making little circuits there, because I don't think you can build these big interstate highways. I think you're born with those. But you can build a lot of little side streets up there where that bush is at. Now, this is a more conventional scanning, and that blue thing, that's like the water that's in the brain. And in my mind, it kind of goes over into the math department there and trashes it. Because I have an absolutely horrible time with sequence. I cannot remember sequence. I have a terrible time with remembering numbers. It's very frustrating. I can see the guy's business card, and I might remember the name of the street, but I can't remember the number. Now, this is a super important slide. We got to work on developing the area of strength. And the thing about people with autism, dyslexia, ADHD, and a whole lot of other so-called disorders is uneven skills. Good at one thing, bad at something else. We need to be building on the talent area. And we need to be looking a lot more at what are they going to do when they graduate. I'm seeing smart kids that have graduated from college, and they got no work skills. They never had any childhood jobs. I'm a photorealistic visual thinker. Absolutely couldn't do algebra. Some of these kids that can't do algebra, let's jump them to geometry. Just skip algebra. Geometry, some of them can do calculus and trig. Then another kind of mind is the pattern mind. There's two kinds of visual thinking. There's photorealistic and there's pattern. There's actual scientific studies that show this to be true. This is a little kid that might be really good at math, but reading's horrible. That tends to be the pattern. Then you got guys that love verbal facts. Their favorite subject's history. They know all the facts about their favorite things. Others are auditory thinkers because they got visual processing problems. You can get mixtures of these different kinds of thinking. And we need to be build up the thing that the kid is good at. Just want to show you there's two ways to do the formula there, the verbal algebra way and the visual spatial way. And for those that think algebra is a prerequisite for geometry, got some news for you. The Greeks invented geometry way before algebra got invented. Okay, I want to give you a glimpse into a mind that's not my mind. See, I want you thinking about different ways of thinking. That praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. No Scotch tape, no cutting, and what you see in the background is the folding pattern. Pure pattern thinking. When I was a kid, the hands-on activities were just great. I'm really appalled that so many schools have taken out hands-on classes. Art, music, cooking, sewing, wood shop. Auto shop. You know, there's some kids that can go on and design cars, but there's other kids where a great job would be fixing cars. And we got a shortage of auto mechanics in this country. We have a shortage of diesel mechanics in this country. We have a shortage of electricians in this country. You know, the really, really skilled trades. If I hadn't had the hands-on classes, I would have just gone absolutely, totally nowhere. You know, I just love building stuff. Now, how do you think about abstract stuff when you think totally in photorealistic pictures? Well, I had to learn the Lord's Prayer. That was one of the first things that was done with me as a kid. I had to learn it. I learned it. I had no idea what it meant. The only part of it that made any sense at all was the power and the glory. And here's the power and the glory. We've got a rainbow with an electric tower at the base of it. Now, all of my thinking uses specific examples to create concepts. This is what's called bottom-up. Most people think top-down, get the hypothesis, jam all the data into it. No, everything is learned with specific example. So how do you learn something like good and bad behavior? That's by specific example. Okay, bullying and teasing, that would certainly be bad behavior. Helping an old lady across the street, that'd be good behavior. And I learned those things just out in the real world by specific example. You stick your tongue out in church, that's rude behavior. Put that in the rude file. But you got to use those teachable moments to teach things. You know, play games with categories. You know, you want to teach flexibility of thinking. An object could be in the rectangular category. It could be in the red category. Maybe it's in both the red and the rectangular category. Play games with categories. That's going to help them to be more flexible. The autistic mind gets into the details. Oh, I notice lots of little details, especially about things that interest me. And the autistic kid's going to pick out the little letters faster than the big letters. Now, some people think autistic learning is just memorization and scripting. And when I was in high school, I was called tape recorder. And I couldn't figure out why were they calling me tape recorder. For young people, I'm going to have to say digital recording device, because they're not going to know what a tape recorder is. When I tell my students, and when I did my master's thesis, I had these things that were like boxes of airline boarding passes that we used for spreadsheet, you know, IBM punch cards. I mean, they go, you did what? And I go, yeah, that's how you did a spreadsheet in the old days, mechanically. But everything is learned by specific example. What you got to do is get the kid out and expose them to a whole lot of different things, because I got to fill up the internet in his mind with lots of information. With lots of specific information. And as I learned more and more things, then I got less and less like a tape recorder. Because then my Google search engine that I'm equipped with has got more stuff to search. Where some of these kids are getting way too sheltered. You got to get them out doing stuff. Now, you can't just jam them into sensory things they can't tolerate. But, you know, if mother knew how hard to push. When I was 13, I had a little sewing job. When I was 15, I took care of 8 horses. When I was in college, I did an internship at a research lab. She was always setting up these things for me. Teaching number concepts. You got to teach it in a concrete way. You can have 2 people, 2 cars, 2 paper clips, 2 pencils, 2 buildings. You know, teach adding and subtraction, you know, with things where, you know, if I have 5 pieces of candy and I eat 2, then I got 3 left. Teach fractions with cooking. Cooking is a great place to teach fractions. You know, I think it's just terrible they've taken these classes out. You know, I've been talking to a number of parents that have had success with Montessori methods. And I'm very pleased to tell you that a lot of those Montessori methods are free on the internet. You can just look it up online. There's lots of garbage online, but there's also lots of really good stuff. Teach word concepts with specific examples. You want to teach the word down with probably at least 4 or 5 or 6 specific examples of using the word down. Because if I just use it for going down the stairs, the child's going to think it only applies to down the stairs. The plane goes down and lands. I put a cup down. I lie down. Now, another brain scan showed I was a lot more interested in looking at pictures of things than looking at pictures of people. But the thing is, if we didn't have people in this world that were interested in things, we wouldn't have electricity. Because Tesla, who invented the power plant, was definitely autistic. Very, very definitely. I got social interaction through shared interests. We got to get kids into different shared interests, things like Lego robotics, cooking clubs, computer clubs, band, the school play. Some of the kids that are verbal, the school play is the best place for them to be because they always have to act. The only places where I was not teased was the specialized interests. And that would be horseback riding, model rocket club, and electronics. When I got outside of those places, I got teased. So get kids involved with that kind of stuff. I've seen some very good things with 4-H and FFA. Horrified that the state of Illinois cut the budget for the FFA program. I think it's absolutely terrible. I heard that Michigan canceled their state fair. Okay, we got the Farm Bureau here, and I think this is really, really bad because the public's totally separated from animals. Also, a lot of these animal activities are some of the best things some of these kids could be doing. There's been kids on the spectrum that have shown a steer at the county fair and won grand champion. I talked to one mom, and her child, who was like 12 years old, wanted to go in the 4-H rabbit club. And the mom was afraid to sign her up, and I said, sign her up. You're going to have bunnies in your backyard, you better get over it. And I just went to a meeting in Pennsylvania where people were learning how to raise chickens, learning how to garden, and I got the most unusual gift in my gift bag. I opened up this, and it had a plastic bag of live mealworm treats for chickens. And I'm going, I don't think airport security is going to be really into this. And I'm really sorry, but I'm going to leave those. I just don't want live mealworms. I don't want them in my house either. But chickens love them. Those are really great chicken treats. Okay, when you have a behavior problem, you got to categorize them. Do I have a biological problem, or do I have a behavioral problem? And if you're working with somebody that's nonverbal and they all of a sudden got a behavior problem when they were good before, it's probably a hidden painful medical problem. Or maybe it's sensory. Or they don't want to go into that room because last week the microphone screamed when they got too close to the speaker and they're afraid that that's going to happen again. Or maybe it's behavior, frustration because they cannot communicate. They do it to get attention. They do it to get out of doing stuff. You got to figure out what's causing a behavior problem. And here are some things we may have to accommodate. Taking the kid out before the fire alarm goes off for the fire drill. There are some individuals that will not tolerate a busy supermarket. I can't tolerate scratchy clothes. And I find that some cotton itches and other cotton doesn't itch. And then I discovered Old Navy khakis. Very, very soft. You have to wash them first. Old Navy. I do not get a commission from Old Navy, but that's what I wear. There are problems with handwriting. Well, then let the kid type. Fluorescent lights are probably the #1 environmental problem in the schools. The other thing is, that's true even for people on the high end of the spectrum, is multitasking is like totally impossible. And I cannot remember long strings of verbal instruction. Write it down. I don't remember sequence. This is where a 50s upbringing helped me. Because when I go out in the technical world and I go to a meatpacking plant or went out to Pixar and places like that, I see people that are mildly on the spectrum there. And then I come back to a meeting and I see a kid that's real bright and he's not going to end up working at Pixar. See, one of the problems we have with the autism spectrum is it's such a big spectrum. Educators are really good at working with some of the more severe kids, but they don't know what to do with smart geeks. You know, maybe the shop teacher used to know what to do with them, but we don't have a shop teacher anymore, which is just terrible. Now, in the 50s, all kids were taught turn-taking. Board games are a great way to teach turn-taking. Being on time was taught. You had to do activities you may not want to do. You had to say please and thank you. And when a social mistake's made, you don't scream no. Give the instruction. Like, for example, if I reached across the dining room table for the mashed potatoes, my mother didn't scream no. She said, ask your sister to pass it. She gave the instruction. If I was in the store and I ran behind the counter, she'd say, only the clerks are allowed to go behind the counter. She gave the instruction. Then I'd get out from behind the counter. You know, bad table manners, things like that, one of them not allowed. But the really important thing is you got to have consistent discipline between home and school. That is just essential. You absolutely have to have it. The rules were the same at home and school. You know what the rule was? A temper tantrum, and it didn't matter whether it was at school or at home, was no TV for one night. That was the rule. Or maybe now it'd be no computer for one night. And it was only taken away for one night. That was the rule. Didn't matter what the reason was for the tantrum. If I pitched a big one at school, mother would get a call from the teacher that I'd thrown a fit at school, and there'd be no TV that night. You know, and I couldn't manipulate mother against the teacher. These kids are masters at that. Boy, in the 50s, the rules were the same in all the houses except one. And only at this one house could we do mud fights in the garage, wet toilet paper fights in the living room. We knew which house we could do the bad stuff in. You know, how about being a slob? Laughing at a fat lady, swearing. I mean, this is stuff that just wasn't allowed. You got to teach those social skills out in the community, like shaking hands. And you got to just demonstrate it. You got to demonstrate how much pressure to use. I'm appalled. The number of kids that are really smart kids that come up to me and they've never been taught how to shake hands. You know, eye contact, how to order food in restaurants. I knew how to do that when I was 7 years old. And it was taught to every kid in the neighborhood how to do that. Shopping, how to do shopping. And I can remember one time we were working on remodeling the kitchen, and I could drive by this point, and I was afraid to go to the lumberyard myself and talk to the clerks. And Mother made me go. Yeah? Well, I came back crying, but I had the wood bought, you know, found out that I could do it. Got to learn how to do these things. The other problem we got today is kids are doing less play where 4 kids will get together and just make up rules for a game. Figure out an activity. You know, negotiate. You can't always get your own way. You see, this gets back to the whole thing of turn taking. And this is something that was drilled into me. We'd be playing a board game, and I'd go out of turn, and my mother would say, wait for your sister to take her turn. Now, the thing is when you grow up, these play groups become work groups. You don't always get your own way. I think it's okay to be eccentric, but you can't be a slob. And there's a scene in the movie where the deodorants are slammed down. That actually happened. But then, on the other hand, don't try to de-geek the geek. You can't make me into something I'm not. And you were never going to make me into some little prissy girl, because I actually hated dolls and all that stuff when I was a kid. It's okay for geeks to cry. Because when I was in 9th grade, I got kicked out of a large girls' school for throwing a book at a girl. She called me a retard. My weapon of choice was a book, of all things. And I went to a special school for kids with problems. And they took away horseback riding for 2 weeks. And what ended up happening is I switched from anger to crying. So you're getting these kids that are going to get this intermittent explosive disorder. They better learn how to cry, or they're going to be whacked out on so many drugs they won't be able to think straight. Well, you know, it's okay for NASA space scientists to cry. There's a 60 Minutes episode. You can put that episode on and watch NASA space scientists cry when the shuttle was canceled. That's why they were able to keep their jobs, because they switched from anger to crying. See, there's problems with top-down control on emotion. And I've had parents say to me, well, my boy cries. So I go, good, good. It's okay to cry. And I had a lot of social problems at the meat plants, and I'd go hide in the electrical room or underneath the stairs. Because if I'd been throwing things, I wouldn't have had any career. Now, here's a rule system I still live with today. You can't have really bad things like people killing each other or wrecking this building. Then you have the courtesy rules. But then you have the illegals, but not bad. You know, like, how do we get around some stupid school rules? You know, that you have to take algebra before geometry. Then you have the sins of the system. Well, you don't mess with those. You better behave at the airport. I had to move that into sin of the system category. These are things where if you break these rules, you get in an absolute ton of trouble. All right, let's look at some of the hidden painful medical problems that somebody's nonverbal could have. Acid reflux, big number 1. They'll be grabbing themselves around here. They might be stretching like this. Constipation, urinary tract infections, yeast infections, ear infections, toothaches. It's absolutely appalling the number of people that are nonverbal that have these problems and not being treated, because doctors tend to go, well, he just has autism. Well, you can have autism, but you can also have a yeast infection that makes you really miserable. And you're going to have to cut a ton of carbs out of your diet to get it to stop. And I used my squeeze machine to help control my panic attacks. When I got into puberty, I had horrendous, horrible panic attacks. Well, now I found out that my fear center is 3 times larger than normal. And that is why I had all these panic attacks. Us visual thinkers, we tend to be panic monsters. And as I went through my 20s, it got worse and worse and worse. And in my early 30s, I went on antidepressant medication. For over 30 years now, I've taken a drug called disipramine. It's an old-fashioned tricyclic antidepressant. It stopped the panic attacks. It also cured my colitis attacks. You know, in the movie, I was eating nothing but yogurt and Jell-O all the time. That's because I had endless colitis attacks. You know, see, a little bit of the right medication really helped. The mistake that's made with antidepressants is giving too high a dose. And you can read all about that in Thinking in Pictures and in the Way I See It book. I have a whole lot of medical information in both of those books. You see, you give too much of an antidepressant, you're going to get agitation and insomnia. Oftentimes, doctors are raising doses when they ought to be lowering doses. You see, there's a big difference between using it to treat anxiety versus using it to treat depression. In fact, they ought to call antidepressants anti-fear drugs, because that's where they really work. And another drug that works really well for fear, especially hot and sweaty kind of fear and rage, is beta blockers. Old-fashioned propranolol, an ancient old blood pressure pill. You know what? The Army likes to find cheap things that work, and they're rediscovering that drug as a treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. I know visual thinkers that are not autistic, and they take a little tiny dose of Prozac in the morning, and they take a beta blocker at night, and it works just great. Okay, there's the rear view of the squeeze machine. Another thing that really helped me was lots of exercise. These kids have got to get more exercise. Maybe taking some fish oil supplements. I was just reading an interesting article yesterday on creatinine. That's a substance that's in meat. Helps in depression. I think I may try getting some of that. Exercise and cut the sugar down. And don't just have a big sugar breakfast, a high-carb breakfast. Okay. This just shows an OT working with a child, doing some pressure. Do some of your ABA and speech therapy while you're doing some of these calming sensory things. Now, the thing is, it works on one kid, it doesn't work on another child. I was a pressure seeker. I liked deep pressure. Another kid, it's not going to work. Some kids respond well to slow swinging. Sometimes that helps stimulate speech. Others, doesn't work. Maybe try music and singing. Music's on a separate set of circuits in the brain. Some kids are helped by weighted vests, but there's a lot of articles on PubMed that say they don't work. See, the problem is, in looking at sensory issues, they're mixing all the apples and oranges together. No, they're only going to work on the kids that crave pressure. Don't work on the others. You know, if we want to study sensory problems, we've got to, subgroup the kids out into the different types of sensory problems that they have. I think it's important to get little kids desensitized so they're going to like hugging. You know, that's actually not that hard to do. In fact, my squeeze machine broke, and I'm hugging a lot more real people now. We have got to work on preparing kids for employment. And I just want to say before I go on, one other thing about drugs. There's way too many drugs given out like candy to little kids. I'm absolutely appalled at the amount of antipsychotic drugs being given out to little kids, and way too many side effects. Now, sometimes there's a place you might need those medications, but they have way too many side effects. The younger the child, the more conservative I'd try to stay away from drugs if possible. Let's try some of the other things. We got to learn how to work. When I was in middle school, I had jobs. You know, back in the old days, everybody had paper routes. Well, there were paper routes around. If there are still some around, I'd put some of these kids on a paper route. They got to learn that discipline of collect the money, get up, get the papers all put together, go deliver them. I also was greatly helped by my science teacher. I had good people that helped me. You know, he introduced me to interesting things, and then I got fixated on things like that optical illusion room, and that helped propel my career. You got to take kids out and visit interesting places. In fact, I just gave a talk at a high school in Fort Lupton, Colorado, and I told all the kids, I said, you know, you got to find out there's a lot more in this world than sports and video games. There's a whole lot more things. And when I was young, people thought I was mentally retarded and I'd amount to nothing, but now half the cattle in this country are handled in the center track restrainer system I designed for the big meat plants. You know, you need to be getting magazines that are interesting to put in the school. The Wall Street Journal's got all kinds of good stuff. Business Week, I love Business Week. It is such a mixture of really serious good articles and really funny things like dog food wine tastings. That was in a Business Week. Other really good magazines are Wired magazine and the Technology Review. The Technology Review is published by MIT. You've got to get kids exposed to interesting stuff. And the other thing is teaching individuals how to make a portfolio, to sell their work, show off their art, show off their math, show off their computer programming, whatever they can do. Well, when I was in high school, I didn't do very much studying, but I did a lot of carpentry work. And I took a crummy old plywood shed and I made it really nice. You got to learn how to do things that other people want. Let's look at jobs for middle school kids. How about walking dogs to people, fixing computers? How about you have 10 houses in the wintertime and you're going to shovel the sidewalks? Maybe 10 houses in the summertime, you're going to mow their lawns for them. Making PowerPoint presentations. Make greeting cards and sell them. Work on a church or neighborhood website. Work in a farmer's market. These are the things that some of these kids need to be doing. Get into a Lego Mindstorms club. And the thing I like about that is it has to do an assigned task. They got to learn how to do work that others want. There's some of my drawings. Always got to show them off. There's one of my drawings in SketchUp. It's actually, Google's actually sold this now. It's no longer Google SketchUp. It's just SketchUp, free 3D drawing software. There's all kinds of great stuff on the internet. Educational resources, community colleges, technical schools. You know, there's all kinds of stuff. Now we're going to get into the good free stuff. Okay, Khan Academy, free math lessons. How about Udacity? Udacity is free computer programming classes. And let me tell you how this works. You do really well on this and they grade it. You might get an email from a headhunter wanting to hire you. Udacity. Other things is MOOC, Massive Open Online Courses. MOOC. It's like a cow's moo with a C on it. MOOC. Also type in free classes at Stanford. Free classes at MIT. This stuff is all free on the internet. Another key word is Open Courseware Consortium. And if you're into math, Wolfram Mathematica. That's an absolutely fantastic website. There's all kinds of good stuff. Now, a lot of this is in the technical fields because it's us techies that give the stuff away. Well, the verbal thinkers and the lawyers, they want to protect all the intellectual property. We can make up new ideas faster than they can rip them off, so. You got to show kids interesting stuff. Like I got all interested in this optical illusion room because I saw it in a movie. And that was shown great in the HBO movie. And there's the movie crew. There was lots of autism spectrum on that movie site. And they were not sweeping the floor either. There's the plant where I started. I didn't get into this stuff with an interview. The way I got in is I was wearing this hand-embroidered Western shirt that I'd made when I was in high school. You know, my third grade embroidery skills that I learned in third grade. I was wearing my portfolio. And the wife of the plant's insurance agent saw it. The movie changed it to the wife of the plant manager, but it actually was the wife of the insurance agent. You see, you never know who can open up the door. You just never know. Well, I'm going to just end up talking about different kinds of jobs. What I do in livestock is basically industrial design. Because when you design things, you got to have the visual thinker to do the visual part and the engineers to do the engineering part. I mean, let's look at something like the iPad, the iPod. Steve Jobs was an artist. And then the engineers have to make the inside work. So you've got to have the two work together. Industrial design's a college major. And who helped me get through my master's thesis? It was the industrial design professor. How about, putting up AV equipment in big conventions, drafting, auto mechanic, diesel mechanic. I wouldn't do architecture right now. I just talked to a lady out at the airport, and her daughter has an architecture degree and no job. Veterinary technician. I'll tell you where the hot jobs right now for visual thinkers. A lot of repair jobs. Diesel mechanics, top auto mechanics. Oh man, you'll be hired instantly. Be a really good photographer. You can do that freelance. Freelance is a really good way to work. There's a lot of different things you can do. All right, now we'll get into the hardcore tech stuff. I'll tell you where the hot jobs are if you're the math head. Dual major, electrical engineering and computer science. Hot. You'll go right into aerospace. Oh, you can get to do really cool stuff like design spy satellites because you got to be US born for that. There's all kinds of jobs if you combine electrical engineering and computer science together. They can't get enough of them. So if you're a math head, that's where you need to be going. Well, I wouldn't go to Wall Street and be a quant so you can wreck the stock market. And that's actually what's happened. Play games with the computers with algorithms and it wrecks the stock market and siphons money off. No, we need to be making things. There's all kinds of things. I went to this Mother Earth fair where people are learning how to grow chickens, and I get things like mealworms for, presents. But you learn how to raise chickens, or you learn how to do high-tech stuff. We got to get back to making stuff, all kinds of stuff. We need to be getting back to high-tech stuff to lower-tech kind of stuff. Now, these are the kind of jobs that are going to work well for the mathematician types. And how about our verbal thinkers? I'm finding they're having some of the hardest time getting jobs because they don't have that fancy portfolio to show off. But one good job is specialty retail because they can know everything about some specialized product. It could be computers, it could be lumber and hardware. Oh, I know a guy that used to work in a hardware store, and he was a specialist in paint. And I know he was on the spectrum, and he made goofy ads with pictures of himself flying over the town. But he really knew his paint. Library jobs. A kid that's like 10 or 12 years old needs to start volunteering in the library. You can teach 10-year-olds how to shelf books, and you've got to impress upon them that a misshelved book is a lost book. You really have to be careful on shelving books, that it's a real responsible job. But we need to be taking these opportunities to do these things. Legal researchers looking up case law, all kinds of research jobs on the internet. We gotta have to start getting creative on the job front. Well, what I'd like to do now is I always like to do a few questions, and let's just get a few people at the front here. I'm gonna get up here where I can see you better. I don't blinded by all these lights. All right, let's pick somebody out here and we'll do a few questions. I'll repeat the question. Okay, I'm going to pick somebody, or we're going to just go and sign some books now. So, okay, right there. Are all autistic people visual? No, this is absolutely not. They're not all visual. That's why I'm showing these different kinds of jobs. When I can't back up on this, sorry, but that's why I was showing jobs for visual thinkers, jobs for the mathematic mind, and jobs for verbal thinkers. No, they're not all visual. You see, I made the mistake of thinking that when I first wrote Thinking in Pictures. And again, I had a few reviews on Amazon that weren't very nice about that. And I think that's one of the things that motivated me to ask people about the steeples. No, they're not all visual. But they do tend to all be specific. They all tend to be bottom-up thinkers and learn by specific example. They all tend to get fixations, but they're not all visual thinkers. I thought I'd made that clear. Okay? We need to be, on sensory integration research, we need to be looking at, okay, if the child has a sound sensitivity problem, how can we treat it? There's a big autism meeting, research meeting every year, INFAR, and I spent 4 hours, or is it INSAR? I can't remember, in INSAR. I went to that website for 4 hours. I looked at every single abstract. There must have been 1,000 of them. on the 2012 meeting. And I did find some sensory papers, but I only found one that was on treatment. This is stuff that we need to be working on. What do we do with somebody that's so sound sensitive that they can't tolerate normal environments? I don't know why this is getting neglected so much. I think it's difficult for normal people to imagine that a noisy bar would just be impossible for some of these people to tolerate. We got 10,000 zillion papers on the social circuits being messed up, and very, very little research on the sensory. And the thing I find is I look at where the papers are done, over half of them are done outside the US. The UK, Australia, Israel, a lot of different places. To me, it's one of the top priorities for research, because a lot of meltdowns and things like that are caused by sensory overload, because the brain can't screen out the stimuli that most people can screen out. Now, there's starting to be some good brain scan research showing some of the documenting that these problems are real. And there's, you take things like the Irlen colored lenses. They only work for 10% of the people with autism, but they really work for that 10%. And they've really worked for some of the students in my class. I sent them out sunglass shopping and get some colored paper. Don't tell me it's just anecdotal. I've kept students from flunking out of school by having them go out and buy some colored glasses and some colored paper. Wouldn't it be stupid to flunk out of college because you didn't mess around with colored glasses at the hippie shop or someplace like that? Okay, right there.
As a teacher of high school students on the spectrum, how do you help them understand their disability and how to manipulate the high school world?
Well, how do you help the high school kid manipulate the high school world? I was one of the ones that had to be taken out of that. I find that lots of times in high school, the more severely autistic kids actually do better, because they usually are fine. But you take the almost normal geek, I think some of them need to be taken out. Let them finish up online. Let's train them for work. Socializing with teenagers is not a job skill that I need. It's that simple. It's that simple. I found that the things that gave me the most insight were first-person reports from other people and the brain research. Now, I have a book out there called Different Not Less, and that contains the story of 14 people on the high end of the spectrum that have been employed all their life. They were diagnosed later in life because they had relationship problems, but they've all been employed. And we actually put entries out on my website. We had about 26 entries, and the 2 that were on Social Security were disqualified. They had to be included in that book. They had to have been employed and self-supporting for their entire life and never collected any Social Security. And the jobs in there range from like store clerk to high-level computer science and veterinarian and really high-level jobs. They all were bullied in school. Almost all of them had paper routes. These seem to be some of the common factors. Quite a few were in the military. That was good for them. And then they all ended up with relationship problems. I think a book like that would be very insightful for someone in high school to read. To know that they're not the only one that's got these problems. Dietary change, it works for some people, maybe about 10%. See, this is the problem we've got with autism. It's a very, very variable condition. See, this label that we have, this insurance code sort of thing we've got, there's a lot of different kinds. And some people are helped by wheat-free, dairy-free. It's worth trying. Let's get the carbs way down, get the yeast infections cleared up. The diets help a subgroup. But the problem is if I took 20 people with autism, maybe the diets only really work on maybe 2 of them. But they really work for those 2. They tend to work on the ones that have a lot of gastrointestinal problems and the regressive autistics, the ones where they had speech and then lost it. Diets are definitely worth trying. Omega-3 fish oil supplements are getting good science now on being good for the brain. I was very interested in this creatinine paper, because I find if I don't have some serious animal protein for breakfast and support the livestock industry at breakfast, that I get lightheaded by 10:30 in the morning. Well, there's something I think wrong with creatinine metabolism and following that. Some of the B vitamins, some of that stuff I think might be worth doing. There's a lot of other far-out stuff that isn't worth doing. The way I look at things is I'd like to have scientific papers, but Sometimes they're hard to come by. So if I can't get that, then I got to have 3 families that can convince me it worked. For things like the colored paper and the colored glasses, I probably have 100 people where it's worked. Diets, probably 100 people where it's worked. Some other kinds of far-out stuff, I might have half a family. That's not enough for me to recommend it. Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions, and then I'll be out at the Barnes & Noble table. Oh, on that balcony? Okay, I can't see you, so just yell out. How do we get home ec, shop, and ag back? We got a lot of retired people in this community and every other community. They need to come back and teach it as volunteers. Because when it comes to mentoring students, you know, I've talked to parents where the mom knew some ancient old Fortran computer programming, and she taught that to her kid. And then that got the spark turned on, and then the kid on his own learned the modern stuff. So even if something's a little outdated, that doesn't matter. You're turning on the spark. Even if you work on a car with a carburetor. I mean, I know those don't even exist anymore. That's the only kind of engine stuff I understand. But even, okay, so you rebuild a carburetor on an old, you know, carburetor car, that gets the kid turned on. You know, we got to get the kid turned on that working on cars is cool. It doesn't matter if it's a carburetor. What you're doing is you're lighting the spark to get this kid fixated on vehicles rather than fixated on cars than on autism. You know, and then there's you know, then you'd have to go to the technical school to learn how to do the computing and stuff. But maybe a local garage. The garages are getting really hard up for mechanics. Maybe they'd be willing to apprentice a kid. Probably have to be 18. But I want to get the kid interested in working on cars when he's 12. See, that's when we need to be introducing these things. You know, it's hard to get the spark turned on later, then they get addicted to video games. And I did read a paper in that INSAR conference, abstracts about video game addiction and autism, and it was bad. Okay? What do I like to do for recreation? Well, I like to go to movies like Avatar. And I used to be, you know, really into Star Trek. I loved Mr. Spock. And I think we'll end on that, and I'm going to see everybody out at the book table, and I want to thank everybody for coming.
We just wanted to thank Dr. Temple Grandin again for coming to Kankakee, sharing her story with us. It's been an incredible night. And again, I want to say thank you to Julie Gindy, the president of our local autism chapter, and my parents, Jerry and Judy Kilbride, because without them, this would not have happened. My parents are extremely passionate about autism, have supported this local group for the last 15 years. They do this for everyone affected with autism, but especially their grandson, Scott. Thank you.
We have just a traveling gift for Dr. Temple Grandin because she will be, and there are no mealworms.
Good, and no mealworms.
Thank you so much. Dr. Temple Grandin will be out in the hallway to our left, correct? As you go out. She did spend a lot of time prior to her speech signing. She has promised to stay for just a short time because she does need to get to a conference up in Tinley Park tomorrow. But she will stay for a little bit. And once again, God bless all of you for coming. Thank you.